it is a good preface to our question we're exploring this morning. It's a text that gives us a lot of meaning. It gives life a lot of meaning, but it also assigns some meaning to our suffering, to our difficulties in life. First, it's saying that through Jesus, we have access to God. We live our lives as people under grace, which is really life-giving. But whenever you talk about grace, you kind of are subtly reminded that we are not perfect, that we have messed up, that we all sin, that we all fall short of God's glory. And so as we kind of approach this question of why is there suffering? Why does God allow suffering? I think it's good to kind of go like this analogy that they used in Re-Engage a lot is like look in like your circle. Look at, take responsibility for what you take responsibility for. It's probably best when we start asking why is there suffering before we do that to acknowledge my part in the suffering. To acknowledge that I am part of the problem of suffering in this world. That I have hurt others. That my sins and my bad decisions have caused pain in this world. And indirectly, Paul's kind of reminding us of that we've sinned, that we've messed up. But on the other side of that, it's not to guilt us. It's not to make us feel bad. It's to say that you have grace. So maybe when we deal with suffering, when we deal with people hurting us, we need to have this mindset of like, well, I've hurt people too, and I have grace for that. So maybe I need to be willing to extend that. So I think that's a good place to start when we wrestle with suffering, is to acknowledge I've done it, I've caused people to suffer, but I'm also forgiven for that. But this text, Paul is assigning meaning or purpose in suffering. And that's something we really want. Whenever we were really dealing with pain and hurt in life, we want something that makes us feel like, well, this was for a reason. This was not all for nothing. There's something gained from it. And really, there's a lot of hard teachings from Paul, a lot of hard teachings in the New Testament, but this is one that frequently comes up a lot. Rejoice in suffering. Be glad in suffering. That's really hard to do. And it's not just Paul who says that. The early church needed to hear that a lot because they were suffering. But part of rejoicing in suffering is finding meaning in it, which is really part of the roach question that we're going to get into in a minute, which is kind of gross. But we want to find some meaning behind this. And so what Paul is saying is, first, this suffering, it shapes us and it makes us better. He says the suffering develops perseverance, and this perseverance develops character. A lot of young adults coming out of college right now, the Gen Zers as we're calling them, and not all of them, but you probably heard about this like research that's came out that like, I think 25%, like a quarter of them are bringing their parents to interviews. Have you seen this? Have you seen this research? It's getting thrown around a lot. And it's a little harsh. And it's not all of them. That means 75% aren't bringing parents to their interviews, okay? So that's a good thing. But it is a little alarming. Because, and I think part of the reason is, I haven't researched this a whole lot, but I think part of the reason that is happening is because parents haven't allowed their kids to suffer and face challenges enough. Parents have protected them. They fixed all their problems. They let them escape any uncomfortable situation, any difficult task with the phone. You can bury your head and escape a social situation, or you can call mommy or daddy and say, Mommy, come pick me up. I don't want to be here. And so you never know how to deal with anything difficult. So they swoop in and they fix problems with mean coaches and hard teachers. Parents are coming in and solving that. And so they've lined up everything for them. They've made their life easy. And ultimately, what they've done is they haven't let their kids develop perseverance and character. And I'm guilty of that in some ways too. I think we all are, but I think that's what's going on. And so all that to say, it doesn't feel loving to let people deal with difficult things, to allow a little bit of suffering. But in our broken and even dangerous world, allowing some suffering is a loving thing to do. That isn't, and I know that doesn't totally solve it, and you're not like, oh, okay, now I'm okay with my suffering. I know but this is part of the things we wrestle with as we deal with suffering in our lives. So let me give you guys the quick answers or the quick options for this morning's question about why are there roaches? This is a funny question my kids have asked. And so whenever you talk about why is there suffering, you're going to have the answer that I'm giving right now. And again, not saying it's totally satisfactory, but it's part of the answer, is the suffering serves some kind of greater good, some kind of greater purpose. And I'm not saying that's always the right answer, but that's something you'll hear. And so with roaches, they'll say, well, roaches serve an ecological purpose. Is my clicker going to work? It's not working. Can we, oh wait, maybe I need to go that way. Nope, clicker's not working either. Anthony, can we go to the next slide? It's frozen, isn't it? Cool. So we don't really need it, but they serve an ecological purpose, is what I'm getting at here. And so I know it's hard to believe that roaches have any good purpose on this earth, that they contribute to life in any way, that roaches somehow make this place more hospitable for life. That's really hard to envision. But as I did my vast Google research on the ecological purpose that roaches serve, this literally came up several times, is that roaches are food for wasps. So, without roaches, there wouldn't be wasps to sting you. See, kids, everything happens for a reason. That's not a very good, maybe there's some kind of cycle of life where this helps. But other answers you'll see is that they help to decompose things. Probably the most common answer is they actually provide nitrogen, which is needed in our forests. So yeah, okay, so they serve some kind of purpose. But in short, whenever you ask about pain or bad things or evil, that's one answer you're going to get. And I know it's not completely satisfactory, but hey, maybe there is some good that comes out of that. I think there are major problems with that sometimes. I don't want to look a kid in the eye and say you were abused by your parent because God wanted some greater good out of that, or God made that happen. Because sometimes that's what we start saying. It's like, oh, well, any bad thing that happened, God is the author of that. And I'm not going to tell people that, and I don't always believe that. But I will say some good can come out of that. Some growth can come out of that. And that's part of rejoicing in suffering, is acknowledging and seeing where you can grow and where the goods come. But that doesn't mean that's why the bad thing happened. But it is helpful to think at some point when you're wrestling with suffering, is what can I do with this bad hand I've been dealt? How can I heal, and how can I learn, and how can I grow from this? So it's really important to find some kind of meaning or purpose in our pain. But just because we found some purpose in it, or just found some meaning in it, or found some healing or growth in it, it doesn't mean that's why God made it happen. I think that's important to note, and I think that's something that a lot of times in Christianity we think in those terms, but it can be unhealthy. God is not the author of every drop of suffering. I don't believe that. I guess we could debate that. I don't believe that. Another answer you're going to get when you talk about why is there suffering is, well, there's free will. There's free will. People can choose to do bad things. And so with the roaches, and with really with a lot of questions about why are there natural disasters? Why are there earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, these things that hurt people that did nothing to deserve it? Why are those things? Again, I'm not saying this is a totally satisfactory answer, but an answer you will get is that, I am not doing well with the clicker. We're going the wrong way. Bad things came with the fall of man. That's the slide that I want up there if you can do it. Bad things came with the fall of man. That's what you'll hear. In Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve sin in the garden, they get kicked out. It says women are going to have pain in childbirth, that there's going to be thorns and thistles on the ground. And so some people will tell you that that's why the earth is a hostile place now. It was all nice before, then when humanity sinned, the earth became a much more hostile place. I think that is kind of what it's getting at. It's kind of describing this is why this is the case. But really indirectly what it's saying is bad things happen and bad things exist because God gave humans free will. God gave humans free will. God gave spiritual beings free will. Free will to sin, free will to reject him, free will to harm others. So God's not making them do that. God's not the author of that. Their sin and their bad choices are the author of pain, oftentimes. Because there is free will, there is suffering. Now, this is a whole other can of worms and a whole other sermon series for another time. But in short, the next question is, well, then why would God give free will if it causes suffering, right? And in short, I'll say we have a God who wants a loving, meaningful relationship with us. And I don't believe we can have a loving and meaningful relationship without some free will. That's the short version. We can unpack that at a later date. Let me tell you a little bit, though, about the roaches you've probably had to deal with in your home or in your church building. Some people call these things water bugs. I do not believe they deserve the dignity of being called that. They are far too gross to be called a water bug. I've had my bug guy corrects me all the time. Be like, yeah, I think I saw some roaches over there. Oh, you mean water bugs? As if he's being politically correct for the roaches. Actually, they prefer the term water bug now. My bug guy is so woke. They're disgusting roaches. They don't deserve to be called water bugs, okay? They're actually an invasive species. They are not from the Americas. They are from Africa. They are native, which makes sense. They're big and gross, and they're scary animals in Africa, right? They were brought over here on ships that were part of the Atlantic slave trade. Those water bugs in your house. That's why they're there. So every time you are bothered by a water bug in your house, you can thank the Atlantic slave trade. There are negative consequences of human free will. Human free will to do bad things, and we're still, even stuff like that, we're still facing consequences from it. So it's important to think about when we wrestle with suffering in life. There is some suffering, and for me personally, I've been dealt a pretty easy hand when I look at my life. Most of my pain and suffering in life was self-inflicted. It was my own bad decisions. I can't blame God, and I can't blame others. Can't be too bad. If we are mad at God for giving me free will to cause my own suffering, then we're just being entitled. We're just being entitled. You can't get mad at God for you causing your own pain. Now, there's a whole other thing. There are some things that just unfairly happen to us that aren't about our bad decisions. And that's the harder one to wrestle with. Suffering that was not self-inflicted. That's a hard one to deal with. And I know whatever I'm saying today isn't going to totally answer all those questions. That's something you're going to have to wrestle with. So maybe I haven't thoroughly answered the question of roaches and bad things, but hopefully I've given you some things to work through. Hopefully you've got a little bit to work on here. Something Paul is encouraging in the text this morning, and really anytime we're told to rejoice in suffering, at some point it's saying you got to deal with this. You need to move from questioning it, asking why and why me, to accepting the reality of it. Why did this, moving from why me, asking why me is very natural, right? There's space for that. Hopefully at some point you can accept it. And part of accepting with it is dealing with it, growing from it, and using it. You unfairly lost your job. At some point, you have to go back on the horse and find a new one. You got to provide. You tore your ACL. You have no choice. We've got several people who have dealt with ACLs, knee injuries, knee replacements. You have no choice but to be mentally tough. If you want to walk again, you just got to toughen up. You got to push yourself. You got to do the rehab. You got to get on that dreaded knee machine. But at the end of that, I've heard a lot of people say this, at the end of that, pain don't even bother you anymore. Pain isn't even a thing. You've toughened up. You've strengthened. And I'm not saying, well, that happened so that you can tolerate pain better. No. But that is a benefit. There was some purpose in that. There was some meaning in what you went through. You're tough. Maybe you had a rough childhood. Parents who didn't love you the way you should have been loved. And you're still dealing with the consequences of that as an adult. At some point, I don't want to rush it, and I don't, everybody's journey is different, but we got to move from the why to the dealing with it. And dealing with it means talking about it, sharing it, bringing it into the light. Talking about maybe with a counselor, maybe with friends. Might mean forgiving, going through some healing process. And it feels lame because I used to hear this a lot. Oh, why did this bad thing happen to me? And growing up, they'd say, oh, so you can minister to people going through the same thing. I don't think that's why those bad things happen, but there is some truth in that. There is some truth in that now, because I've had this experience, I can connect with people who have. I can bless people who are going through the same thing. That's not why it happened, but this is something that has come out of it. I can minister to others with similar pain. I have several friends who've had really tough childhoods, and they're closer because of it. And they get each other because of it. And they can talk about it. And they are healing together because of it. There is some purpose in that. There are some things that draw people together. And so I think it's really important that we need to acknowledge and deal with our suffering. And we need to move from why to what am I going to do with this now? And if you look at Jesus, and if you look at the disciples, you look at what they did. They healed. They fed. They blessed. They brought people together. One of the reasons I have a lot of issues with everything happens for a reason. But another one of those is that it might actually make us passive to bad things in this world. You say, oh, it just happened for a reason. I'm going to leave it alone. No. We are here as God's people to alleviate suffering in this world. Yes, we care about the afterlife. Yes, that's so important. But what happens now matters. What happens in life matters. And people need to know that. We care about you now. We don't just care about your soul and your eternity. We also care about you now as a person. What happens now matters. So, how can we alleviate suffering in this world? Maybe we can provide clothing and food for the disadvantaged. Maybe we can be friends to the lonely people that the world has rejected. Maybe we can walk with people as they're grieving. Bring them food. Cry with them. Mow their lawns. Maybe we can let those who think they are alone know you are not alone. Maybe we can be parents to the parentless. I personally am going to alleviate some suffering in this world by killing some roaches. But there is a point. There is a point where we are here to alleviate suffering. In our text this morning, Paul says we can have hope. We can have hope in suffering. Hope that one day all these wrongs will be righted. One day all this suffering is somehow going to make sense. Anytime we talk about suffering, we must remember that Christ suffered. That in some way he suffers with us and for us. So as we approach the question of suffering, I still don't totally get it. I still don't totally understand why. But at the same time, I don't know why we have such an amazing God who is willing to come and suffer for us. And he did that because he loves us. He did it because one day wrongs will be righted. Every tear will be wiped away. He suffered to alleviate suffering. And until that time, we are with God in heaven, and all wrongs are made right. We're going to work here on earth to make it a safe place of God's love. We're going to work to bring, like Jesus prayed, to bring your kingdom here on earth. We want his kingdom here on earth too. We're not just worrying about the afterlife. We're worried about now. And maybe now's the time for you. Maybe it's time to give your life to Christ. Maybe it's time to reach out for prayers of the congregation. And we want to invite you now. If you have a need from your church family, we want to walk with you through it. We want to walk with you through suffering. We want to mourn with you. We want to work towards your healing. So we invite you, if you have any need, to come now as together we stand and sing.